Sister Catherine had been serving at St. Joseph's Catholic Church in downtown Chicago for nearly 20 years when the black limousine pulled up to the rectory on that crisp November morning. She was tending to the small garden behind the church, pulling the last of the autumn weeds before the first snowfall, when Father Martinez came looking for her with an expression she'd never seen before. "Sister Catherine!" he called, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the courtyard. There's a car here for you." She brushed the dirt from her hands and looked up at him with confusion. "Think there's been some mistake. I'm not expecting anyone." "A car? Father? The driver asked for you specifically. Sister Catherine Marie Rodriguez from St. Joseph's. That's you, isn't it?" Catherine felt a flutter of unease in her stomach. In all her years of service, no one had ever sent a car for her. Her family lived modestly in Milwaukee, and none of them could afford such an extravagance. "Did he say who sent him?" Father Martinez shook his head. "Just that he was instructed to bring you to an address in Lincoln Park. He has official documentation, and everything looks legitimate, but—" He paused, studying her face. "You don't have to go if you don't feel comfortable." Catherine walked with him to the front of the church, where indeed a pristine black Lincoln Town car sat idling at the curb. The driver, a professional-looking man in his 50s wearing a crisp uniform, stepped out when he saw them approaching. "Sister Catherine Rodriguez?" he asked politely, removing his cap. "Yes, that's me. My name is James Morrison. I've been instructed to escort you to an appointment this morning. I have identification and authorization letters if you'd like to see them." Catherine exchanged glances with Father Martinez, who nodded encouragingly. The driver's credentials checked out. He worked for a reputable car service that catered to Chicago's elite. The letter requesting her presence was written on expensive letterhead from a law firm she recognized as one of the city's most prestigious. "May I ask what this is regarding?" Catherine asked. "I'm sorry, sister, but I wasn't given those details. I was simply asked to ensure your safe and comfortable transport to the Hartwell residence in Lincoln Park." The name meant nothing to Catherine, but Lincoln Park was one of Chicago's most affluent neighborhoods. She couldn't imagine why anyone living there would need to see her, let alone send a private car. "I suppose there's no harm in going," she said finally. "Without me this morning?" "Father, will you be all right managing?" "Of course. But Catherine, please call if you need anything, and don't feel obligated to stay if the situation makes you uncomfortable." The ride through Chicago's busy streets gave Catherine time to think. She ran through all the possibilities in her mind. Perhaps a wealthy parishioner was ill and had requested last rites, though that seemed unlikely given that she wasn't a priest. Maybe someone needed counseling or spiritual guidance. In her years at St. Joseph's, she had become known for her work with troubled families and her ability to provide comfort in times of crisis. As they drove deeper into Lincoln Park, the houses grew larger and more impressive. Massive Victorian mansions sat behind iron gates, their perfectly manicured lawns and gardens speaking of wealth beyond Catherine's comprehension. She had grown up in a working-class family and had chosen a life of service and simplicity. This world felt alien to her. The car finally stopped in front of a stunning 3-story Georgian mansion that looked like something from a magazine. The red brick facade was complemented by white columns and perfectly symmetrical windows. A circular driveway curved around a fountain, and the gardens were so precisely maintained they looked like a work of art. "We're here, sister," James said, getting out to open her door. Catherine stepped out onto the pristine driveway, feeling suddenly self-conscious in her simple black habit. The house loomed before her, intimidating in its grandeur. Are you sure this is the right address? Absolutely. Mrs. Hartwell is expecting you. They walked up the wide stone steps to the front door, which was answered before they could even ring the bell. A woman in her 70s stood there, elegantly dressed, in a cream-colored suit with pearls at her throat. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless, but it was her eyes that caught Catherine's attention. They were bright blue, and filled with an emotion Catherine couldn't quite identify. "Sister Catherine," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "Coming. I'm Eleanor Hartwell. Please, please come in." "Thank you so much," for Catherine followed her into a foyer that was larger than most people's living rooms. A crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling, and an elegant staircase curved upward to the second floor. Oil paintings in gold frames lined the walls, and fresh flowers arranged in expensive vases filled the air with their fragrance. "Mrs. Hartwell," Catherine said carefully, "I'm not sure why I'm here. Your driver was very professional, but he couldn't tell me the purpose of this visit." Eleanor's hands fluttered nervously. "Of course, you must be confused. Please, let's go to the sitting room where we can talk properly. Would you like some tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you." They settled into a beautifully appointed sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the garden. Eleanor poured tea from an ornate silver service, her hands shaking slightly as she handed Catherine the delicate china cup. "Sister Catherine," Eleanor began, then stopped, taking a deep breath. "I hardly know where to begin. This is one of the most difficult conversations I've ever had to have." Catherine felt her stomach tighten. "Is someone ill? Do you need spiritual counseling?" "No, nothing like that." Eleanor set down her teacup and looked directly at Catherine. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Were you born on March 15th, 1975, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin?" "Sister," Catherine's blood ran cold. "Yes, but how could you possibly know that?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Were 3 days old? And were you given up for adoption when you—" The teacup slipped from Catherine's hands, crashing to the floor and shattering on the expensive Persian rug. She stared at Eleanor in shock, her mouth opening and closing without sound. This was information she had shared with virtually no one. Not even Father Martinez knew the full details of her background. "How do you know that?" Catherine whispered. Eleanor was crying now, tears streaming down her carefully made-up cheeks. "Dear girl, I'm the one who gave you up." "Because my—" The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. She felt dizzy, as if the beautiful room was spinning around her. "That's impossible," she managed to say. "My birth mother she was 17 years old, unmarried, and terrified." Eleanor finished gently. "Girl from a wealthy family who made a terrible mistake, and whose parents were more concerned with their reputation than with their daughter's well-being." She was a Catherine stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the perfectly manicured garden without seeing it. You're telling me that I'm your mother," Eleanor said softly. "You for 37 years. Your biological mother. And I have been looking for—" The silence in the room was deafening. Catherine could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece, could hear the distant sound of traffic on Lakeshore Drive. But she couldn't process what she had just heard. "Why now?" she asked finally, not turning around. "Why are you telling me this now?" Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. "Because I'm dying, Catherine. I have pancreatic cancer, and the doctors have given me 3 to 6 months to live. And because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving this world without trying to make amends for the worst decision I ever made." Catherine turned around slowly, studying Eleanor's face with new eyes. Now that she was looking for it, she could see similarities: the shape of their eyes, the line of their jaw, the way their hands moved when they were nervous. "You gave me up because you were ashamed of me," Catherine said, her voice flat and emotionless. "No!" Eleanor stood up quickly, moving toward her. "No, that's not how it was. I gave you up because I was 17 and scared, and my parents convinced me it was the only option. They said I was too young to raise a child, that it would ruin my life and yours. They said you deserved a family who could give you everything I couldn't. And did I? Did I get everything you couldn't give me?" Eleanor's face crumpled. "I don't know. I tried to find out, but adoption records were sealed back then. I hired private investigators over the years, but they could never find you. It wasn't until recently, when I got sick, that I decided to try one more time. I hired the best firm in the city, and they finally traced you to St. Joseph's. Tui." Catherine sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. The family who adopted me? They were good people, the Rodriguezes. They loved me, raised me well. I had a happy childhood. "Thank God," Eleanor whispered, "and loved. That's all I ever wanted to know. That you were happy. But you never tried to contact me when I became an adult? Never tried to see if I wanted to meet you?" Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I was afraid. Afraid you would hate me. Afraid you wouldn't want anything to do with me. And as the years went by, it became easier to live with the guilt than to risk the rejection." Catherine studied this woman who claimed to be her mother. Eleanor Hartwell was clearly wealthy, educated, sophisticated, everything Catherine had imagined her birth mother might be. But she was also broken, carrying decades of regret and guilt. "What happened after you gave me up?" Catherine asked, quietly. "I finished high school, went to Northwestern University, became a teacher. I married a good man, Robert Hartwell, when I was 25. We tried to have children for years, but I was never able to get pregnant again. The doctors said it was unexplained infertility, but I always wondered if it was God's way of punishing me for giving away the only child I was meant to have. Mrs. Hartwell, Eleanor, please, call me Eleanor." Catherine took a deep breath. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. I became a nun because I felt called to serve God, not because I was trying to fill some void left by being adopted. I've had a good life, a meaningful life. I'm not angry at you." Eleanor's eyes widened with surprise. "You're not?" "I was, for a moment, when you first told me. But anger is a luxury I can't afford in my line of work. I've counseled too many young women facing unplanned pregnancies, too many families torn apart by difficult decisions. I understand how scared you must have been." Eleanor began crying again, but these were tears of relief rather than grief. "I've spent 37 years imagining this conversation, and in every version of it, you hated me. You told me I was selfish and terrible, and that you never wanted to see me again." "I could never hate you," Catherine said gently. "You're the reason I exist. And regardless of the circumstances, you carried me for 9 months and gave birth to me. That's not nothing." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. "I know this is a lot to process, and I don't expect anything from you, I just, I wanted you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I ever did, and not a day has gone by that I haven't thought about you and wondered if you were okay." Catherine looked around the beautiful room, at the expensive furnishings and artwork, at the life of privilege and luxury that could have been hers. "Do you have other family? Husband? Children?" Eleanor shook her head sadly. "Robert died 5 years ago. We never had children, as I mentioned. There are some distant relatives, but no one close. I've been quite alone, actually. And now you're facing this illness alone as well." "Yes, but it's what I deserve, I suppose. The choices we make have consequences." Catherine felt something shift inside her, a softening she hadn't expected. This woman might be her biological mother, but more than that, she was a human being facing death alone, carrying decades of regret and guilt. "Eleanor," Catherine said carefully, what if you didn't have to face this alone?" Eleanor looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we tried to get to know each other? I can't promise anything long-term, and I need to think about all of this. But maybe we could start with having tea once a week. You could tell me about your life, and I could tell you about mine." Eleanor's face lit up with hope. "You would do that? Even after what I did?" "Especially because of what you did. You gave me life, Eleanor. Twice, actually. Once when you carried me and gave birth to me, and again when you made the difficult decision to place me with a family who could raise me properly. Maybe it's time we both stopped carrying the weight of that decision alone." Eleanor reached across the coffee table and took Catherine's hands in hers. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "None of us deserve forgiveness," Catherine replied. "That's what makes it grace." Over the following weeks, Catherine began visiting Eleanor regularly. What started as weekly tea visits became twice weekly, then 3 times a week as Eleanor's condition worsened. Catherine would sit with her in the beautiful sitting room or in the garden when the weather was nice, listening to stories about Eleanor's life, her marriage to Robert, her career as a high school English teacher. Eleanor, in turn, was fascinated by Catherine's work at St. Joseph's. She asked endless questions about the families Catherine counseled, the programs the church ran for the homeless, the way Catherine had found her calling to religious life. "I always wondered if you inherited my love of literature," Eleanor said one afternoon as they sat in the garden. "I taught English for 35 years, and I could never get enough of books." Catherine smiled. "I do love to read. I have a master's degree in theology, but I've always been drawn to poetry and literature as well. I use a lot of literary references in my homilies. Poetry was my favorite to teach. There's something about the way poets can capture the human experience in just a few lines that always amazed me." As the months passed, Catherine began to see herself in Eleanor in ways that went beyond physical resemblance. They both had a tendency to worry about others before themselves. Both were drawn to helping people through difficult times. Both found comfort in words and books. But it was during Eleanor's final weeks that Catherine truly understood the depth of what they had found together. Eleanor had been moved to a hospital bed in her home, with round-the-clock nursing care. Catherine would come every day after her duties at the church, sitting beside the bed and reading aloud, sometimes from the Bible, sometimes from poetry collections, sometimes from novels they both loved. One evening, in late spring, as Catherine read from a book of Mary Oliver's poetry, Eleanor reached out and took her hand. "Catherine," she whispered, her voice weak but clear, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I need you to know that these last few months, getting to know you, have been the happiest of my life." You grew up to be everything I hoped you would be, and more. You're kind and intelligent and compassionate, and you've dedicated your life to helping others. I couldn't be more proud of the woman you became." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "Eleanor, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. I spent 37 years feeling guilty about giving you up. But now I understand that it was the right decision. Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you enough to want what was best for you. The Rodriguezes gave you something I couldn't have given you at 17. Stability, maturity, the ability to nurture your calling to religious life." Eleanor paused, gathering her strength. "But more than that, I want you to know that having this time with you has healed something in me that I didn't even know was broken. I'm not afraid to die anymore, because I know that part of me will live on in you and in all the good work you do." Catherine squeezed Eleanor's hand gently. "Didn't know it until now. Part of you has always lived on in me. Eleanor died peacefully 3 days later, with Catherine sitting beside her bed, holding her hand and reading from the Gospel of John. In her will, she left everything to Catherine: the house, her investments, her personal belongings, everything. The other nuns at St. Joseph's were shocked when they learned about Catherine's inheritance. Mother Superior Agnes called her into her office the day after the reading of the will. "Sister Catherine, this is quite an unusual situation." "Already feel brother," Agnes said, studying the legal documents. "You've inherited a considerable fortune. What are your intentions?" Catherine had been thinking about this question for days. "I want to turn the house into a residence for pregnant teenagers who have nowhere else to go. A place where they can live safely while they decide what's best for their babies, whether that's parenting or adoption. We could provide counseling, education, support, everything Eleanor wished she had when she was 17. Mother Agnes smiled. "That sounds like exactly what Eleanor would have wanted." The Eleanor Hartwell Home for Young Mothers opened 6 months later. The beautiful Lincoln Park mansion was converted into comfortable living spaces for 12 young women, with counseling offices, a nursery, and common areas where the residents could support each other through one of the most difficult times in their lives. Catherine took a leave of absence from St. Joseph's to oversee the home's operations, though she continued to live as a nun. Every morning, she would walk through the rooms where she and Eleanor had shared their final months together, and she would say a prayer of gratitude for the unexpected gift of finding family in the last place she had ever expected to look. 1 year after Eleanor's death, Catherine was working in the garden behind the house when one of the residents, a 17-year-old named Maria, came looking for her. "Sister Catherine," Maria said, "baby for adoption. I wanted to tell you that I've decided. I'm going to place my Catherine," looked up from the roses she was pruning. "Decide quickly." "Are you sure?" "There's no pressure to, I'm sure. And I wanted to thank you for helping me understand that choosing adoption doesn't mean I don't love my baby. It means I love her enough to want what's best for her, even if that's not with me." Catherine smiled, hearing Eleanor's words echoed in this young woman's voice. "Exactly right, Maria. Love sometimes means letting go." As Maria walked back toward the house, Catherine looked up at the windows of what had once been Eleanor's sitting room. For just a moment, she could swear she saw a figure there, watching over the young women who now called this place home. "Thank you," Catherine whispered to the empty window. "Thank you for showing me that sometimes the most profound gifts come disguised as the most painful losses." The afternoon sun streamed through the garden, warming Catherine's face as she returned to her work among Eleanor's roses. Around her, the sounds of young voices drifted from the house, women supporting each other through difficult decisions, finding strength in community, learning that they were not alone. It wasn't the life Catherine had planned when she took her vows 20 years earlier, but as she had learned in her months with Eleanor, sometimes the most important callings come to us in ways we never expect, from people we never thought we'd meet, in moments that change everything we thought we knew about love, loss, and the mysterious ways that grace works in the world. And in the end, Catherine realized, perhaps that was the most sacred calling of all, to remain open to the unexpected ways that God works through human connections, even ones that begin with a black limousine arriving at your door on an ordinary Tuesday morning, carrying you toward a truth you never knew you needed to find.